This is the Davidson County Network.
Hi, this is the Davidson County Network. I'm Jamal Taher Kelly. Today, as part of our conversation series, we're speaking with legendary NASCAR Crew Chief and Fox Sports Analyst, Mr. Larry McReynolds. Larry's going to talk about his childhood in Alabama, his careers as both a NASCAR Crew Chief and Fox Sports Analyst, some of the NASCAR legends he's worked with over the years, such as Davey Allison and most notably Dale Earnhardt, and much more. So as always, sit back, relax, enjoy a nice cup of coffee, or if it's a hot day, a nice cold sweet tea, and enjoy the interview. Hi, this is Jamal Taher Kelly with the Davidson County Network, and tonight we have the privilege, as part of our conversation series, to speak with legendary NASCAR Crew Chief and Fox Sports Analyst, Mr. Larry McReynolds. Larry, thank you so much. I know it's been a long day for you. We had the rare Monday race at Michigan due to the rain yesterday, so I appreciate you taking time to speak with us on your drive home tonight.
No, I appreciate you having me. Yeah, we don't like rain out. This is the second one we've had in 2019. We had one a few weeks ago up at Dover, but unfortunately, there's a lot of things we can control, but the weather isn't one of them. But I think everybody that was patient and waited through everything that went on up there at Michigan, I think at the end of the day, they got to see a pretty good race at Michigan this afternoon.
Oh, yes, sir. That was an amazing race. So my first question is, what first sparked your interest in racing, and how did you get your start?
Well, that's a pretty interesting question because I actually didn't come from a racing background. From Birmingham, Alabama. I was an only child. My mom and dad absolutely had no interest whatsoever in racing. But my aunt, my mom's sister, who was really more like a sister to me, she was only 10 years older than I was. She was a bit of a race fan. And then my grandfather, my mom's dad, was a race fan. And every Friday night, the three of us would walk down to the local track, which was only about a 10 or 15-minute walk there at BIR, Birmingham International Raceway. And we would walk down to the local races there on Friday night and watch them and really enjoyed them. I know I thoroughly did. And, of course, I was just in grade school. And then eventually my aunt ended up getting married, and her husband was a race fan. He was actually a pretty good mechanic. And so the four of us, every Friday night, we would go to the local races there at Birmingham. And then I want to say I was probably about a freshman or sophomore in high school, somewhere around 1974, 1975. And they started this brand new division at Birmingham called a street stock hobby division. And it was pretty much as stock a division as you could think about having. I mean, you took the windows out, you took the seats out, you put a racing seat in it, put a few roll bars in it, you put the fuel tank up at the trunk, and put a number on it, you had a race car. So this first night they did it, my aunt, she actually was a little bit of a hot rodder, and she looked at her husband and said, you know what, I could do that. And so her husband kind of chuckled and said, well, tell you what, go out and find you some sponsors, and we'll build you a race car. Well, she called his bluff, and I'm sure a lot because of being a woman in a predominantly male sport, she went out and rounded up more sponsors than we could almost have room on the race car. And so my little racing career, I mean, I didn't know a back window from a front rotor, but that's what got my little racing career started right there in their basement, building her a street stock hobby car.
Oh, wow. Can you talk about working your way up the ladder to becoming a crew chief for the first time in 1985?
Yeah, so working with her for a couple of years, and I got to be honest, there was not a lot of success with her racing, and I can't say it was totally because of her ability to drive a race car. A lot just had to do, even with those lower divisions, not having the proper funding and resources. And, racing is like a disease. It gets in your bloodstream, and there's no getting it out. And so I was working, actually, after I graduated from high school, I was working for a junkyard, or a salvage yard, I guess you might say, and they sponsored a late model car. And so I started going to some of the races with the man I worked for that sponsored the car, Charles Finley Auto Parts out of Birmingham. And I started kind of jumping in and helping them a little bit with their late model cars. And next thing you know, the owner of that car said, you know what, if you ever get tired of helping your aunt, you can always come over here and start helping us. Well, that's all I needed to hear. And so I moved over there to start helping them. We started winning some races. We started running a lot all over the Southeast. Won some big races in 1978, 1979. And then I decided, you know, I'm working at a junkyard by day, working on these late model cars by night. I really want to pursue racing for a way of making a living. And I was pretty convinced that was not going to happen in Birmingham, Alabama. So in September of 1980, I packed up a U-Haul behind my little 1971 green Pinto, and up to the Carolinas I went to work for a brand new race team that was starting in Greenville, South Carolina, that was running some limited races in 1980, and they were going to run the full schedule in 1981. And I went up there and went to work for them, and worked for them for about a year and a half until they finally closed the doors, and went to work for Mark Martin halfway through his rookie season in 1982. And then that kind of folded up at the end of 82. And just one thing led to another, and I continued to work from some smaller teams that struggled with budgets, that struggled keeping their doors open. But finally, in 1985, I was working for a team out of Greenville, South Carolina. A man by the name of Bobby Hawkins owned the team, and we ran a very limited schedule. I mean, I think we only ran 3 or 4 races in 1985 with Morgan Shepherd. And I don't know if you could call me the crew chief because we only had 3 full-time employees. But in November of 1986, Kenny Bernstein, the drag racer, came to NASCAR. He had a sponsor with Quaker State. He had a driver with Joe Ruttman. He just didn't really have a team to take it to. And so Winston, R.J. Reynolds Tobacco, hooked Kenny up with Bobby Hawkins, who I worked for. They formed a partnership, but it didn't take long for everybody involved to realize this probably wasn't going to work because just 2 completely different business philosophies. So right before the final race of 1985 in Atlanta, Kenny bought Bobby Hawkins out, and lo and behold, we ran the full schedule in 86, and just a few weeks before the season started, Kenny made me the crew chief, and that's kind of how the whole thing evolved in a very, very short period of time.
Wow, and the rest is history. So you've been fortunate enough to work with so many NASCAR legends, including Davey Allison and most notably Dale Earnhardt. I know as a NASCAR fan, when we're sitting, watching TV or if we're at the track, for me, it's, I try to go to the Charlotte races annually. We're envious of the drivers. We would love to be behind the wheel of one of those cars or on pit road calling the shots. What do you miss most about being a crew chief?
Yeah, probably just the competition. I loved walking out the pit road on Sunday or Saturday, whatever day it was that was race day, and trying to witch match with the sharpest minds in all of motorsports. And I do miss that. But the good thing about it, over the last 19 years, the role that Fox has put me into, I almost feel like I'm crew chief for every team out there. And I can kind of break down all the different strategies that teams are. But probably just the competition side, trying to figure out how to have the fastest car in qualifying, trying to figure out how to have the fastest car in the race, and win the race. And Matt quit, again, with the smartest minds in all of motorsports in my book. Yeah, that's certainly something that I miss, but I truly love what I do today.
But it is cool because you are America's crew chief, so that is really cool. So in 1992,
I don't know where that came from. Adam Alexander, who I work with, kind of gave me that nickname, and I kind of looked at him funny the first time he said it, but it's one of those things that stuck, and it's very flattering that people like yourself refer to me as America's crew chief.
Oh yes, sir. So in 92, you won the Daytona 500 with Davey Allison, and then, of course, we all know in 98, you won the Daytona 500 with Dale Earnhardt. What was the most memorable aspect of both of those Daytona 500 wins? Of course, we know with Dale it was the 20 years of trying and the frustrations, but are there any other things from that day that really stand out to you? And the same with Davey Allison's win.
Well, I had only been with Robert Yates Racing for just right at a year. I joined that organization in the early spring of 1991, about 4 or 5 races into that year. And, I had been a part of a number of Daytona 500s, but never even came close to winning it. And I guess to go down there and to lose our primary car in a practice crash before the dual race on Thursday, and had to start the dual race, the qualifying race at the rear of the field, to come back and finish third with a backup car that we had basically had no practice with, and then to start that 500 on the third row and to win it. Davey's first Daytona 500 win, Robert Yates Racing's first 500 win, certainly my first 500 win. That was a very, very special win. I don't know what a coach that wins a World Series feels like. I don't know what a coach that wins a Super Bowl feels like. But I have to believe it's pretty close to the feeling of winning a Daytona 500. And then, of course, roughly a year and a half later, losing Davey in that helicopter crash, that even ramped up even just that much more how special it was. So Davey loved Daytona and Talladega, a lot like his dad. Mm-hmm. He loved racing at those racetracks, and to know that was his only win in the biggest race of the year, it was huge. And then to come back 6 years later with Dale Earnhardt in the 3 car, and to know deep down how much he wanted to win that race. He had come so close, so many times. I mean, we even came close my first year with him in 1997. We were leading with less than 20 laps to go, and I remember looking at Richard Childress and going, "What do you think?" He went, "Been here way too many times." And with about 11 or 12 laps to go, I realized what he was talking about, because the 3 car was barrel rolling down the back straightaway. So to go back there the next year, and we put so much effort into that car. We built that car about halfway through the 1997 season. That car had already been in the wind tunnel 2 or 3 times. It had already been track tested 2 or 3 times, even before the 97 season ended. And to go down there, and it's almost like we could do no wrong. And then we had the engine issue in the final practice on Saturday. We changed the engine the race morning. But I guess the thing that sticks out to me the most about winning that race was we had been in victory lane for a while, and things were starting to settle down. And, of course, again, I had been there once before in 92 with Davey. But I guess I just kind of took a step back. And I watched Dale and Teresa Earnhardt, how much it meant to them to finally win this race. And then, honestly, I watched Richard and Judy Childress. Just think about, they've been trying for all these years as a car owner, and, of course, Richard for many years as a driver. And I took a step back and just watched those 4 people, how much it meant to them. And it's a moment I'll never forget. It was almost like a parent taking a step back on Christmas morning and watching your kids open up their Christmas present. It was a very special moment, a moment that I will never, ever forget as long as I live.
Oh, that's so cool. Speaking of Mr. Childress, of course, this is the Davidson County Network, and one of the most notable racing personalities to come from Davidson County is Richard Childress. Can you talk about your relationship with Richard over the years and how it's developed?
Yeah, I mean, I worked for essentially three major owners in the sport. Kenny Bernstein, that I spoke about, that gave me my first opportunity as a crew chief in 1986. I will always be indebted to him. And then working for Robert Gates from 1991 through 1996, going to work for Robert Gates, that's what put Larry McReynolds on the NASCAR map, no question. But to work for Richard Childress, to know what he had built there and where he had come from, which was basically nothing. As he says even today, only in America can someone that basically came from the very bottom grow in the sport of NASCAR as we've seen Richard Childress. And, you know, he was such an amazing person to lean on. You know, Richard let you do your job. He never stepped in and said, you should do this, you should do this, even though he knew probably what was right or wrong. But, you know, he's somebody that I'll always treasure working with. And to know, even though now Richard Childress Racing has won 3 Daytona 500, to know that I was a part of that first, and with all people, probably the most talented driver to ever grip the steering wheel of a NASCAR Cup car, to do it with Richard Childress at Dale Earnhardt 1998, I will always treasure that. And I think Richard Childress proved to me what an amazing person he was and what a close friend he became, because honestly, in 2000, I had just signed a new 3-year contract with Richard. And just shortly after I signed that contract is when Fox approached me about possibly coming to work for them. And it's something I really wanted to do. It's not that I was unhappy working with Richard Childress Racing, but I just felt like it's something I wanted to pursue for myself and for my family, and to try something different. And Richard was good enough. He could have held my feet to the fire and not let me out of that contract for 2001, 2002. But when I went to him, he totally understood what I was doing, why I wanted to do that, and he was kind enough, without any hiccups, let me out of that contract and pursuing a second career in NASCAR. I will always be indebted to him. He's a friend today, and it's a friendship that I will always treasure.
That's awesome. He's done so much for Davidson County. We actually interviewed Mr. Childress a few weeks ago, and it was an awesome experience. He's a really great person.
Well, he's
in your book,
he's a great person, and he was a great owner to work for. Trust me.
Wow. So in your book, The Constant Pursuit of Perfection, which is a great read, by the way, you talk about always finding the good in the bad. Can you talk about how you applied that in your own career as a crew chief and even as an analyst?
Well, honestly, I've tried to apply that to my entire life, personally and professionally. And, you know, I've tried, as I've grown older and I've become more mature, I've tried to focus on things that I could control. We talked about the rain out at Michigan. You know, 30 years ago, I'd have been sideways about the weather. But you know what? There was nothing I could do to change that. And I really got to give a lot of credit to Robert Gates about teaching me a lot of things about just life in general. And, you know, back in the 90s, when I worked for Robert Gates, we would get NASCAR rule changes. People think there's a lot of rule changes today. We would get rule changes weekly. And when I felt like a rule came our way that was not in our favor, I would just absolutely lose my mind. And Robert Yates always took me and sat me down and said, Larry, the people are the person that takes change. Nobody likes change. We're all creatures of habit. When everything's going great, the last thing we want is change. But he said, Larry, the people are the person that takes change and looks at that change and says, even though it's going to be a challenge, I'm going to take this change and I'm going to make it good. I'm going to make things better. That's the people that will prevail. And that man was so right. You know, at the end of 2015, I was thrown a pretty big change in my career as a broadcaster. They hired Jeff Gordon, who essentially took my place in the booth, which I've got to say was an amazing hire. Jeff Gordon has added so much to our broadcast over the last 4+ years, but it was a big change for me. And, you know, I could have pouted and stomped and snorted and been upset about that change, but I thought back to what Robert Yates taught me. Take change and make it better. And that's what I did. And honestly, I felt like we did create a totally different role for me that was good and better. When I was a crew chief for Robert, I remember we got a rule change in the fall of 1993. It was something NASCAR was wanting to try. It was called the 5 and 5 rule. They cut the front valence off to 5 inches above the ground, and they cut the rear spoiler down to 5 inches. Took a ton of downforce away. And I just absolutely lost my mind. And that's when Robert gave me another one of those sermons. Take this change, figure out how to make it good, and you'll prevail. And you know what? That's what we did. We went to the wind tunnel. We worked with that package for what little limited time we had. And we went back out there at the Charlotte race in the fall of 1993, just shortly after Ernie Irvin started driving the 28 car. And we led 328 of 334 laps. The only laps we didn't lead was during green flag pit cycle. And that taught me, don't be afraid of change. You can be scared of change. You maybe don't like change, but embrace it, and you can make it better. And that's really, there was a lot of messages in the book, The Constant Pursuit of Perfection, but that was the biggest message I tried to put out there.
That's some amazing life advice. So we live in a day and age of social media, of course, and you have a lot of people who are negative about the current state of NASCAR, and you have a lot of fierce defenders of NASCAR. What's your opinion on the current state of NASCAR, and where do you see NASCAR in the next 5 to 10 years?
No, that's a great question, and I got to be very honest and very candid. About 6, 7, 8 years ago, I was pretty concerned, and I was pretty scared. I just did not know where we were headed with NASCAR. I felt like the leadership that it had was not good, that we just were going the wrong direction. But I've got to say it, and people accuse me of drinking the NASCAR Kool-Aid. Trust me, that's not the case. I've got to say that over the last year or two, I couldn't be more excited about the direction that we are headed. I think we have great leadership now with Steve Phelps as our president, with Jim France, Bill France Jr.'s brother, stepping in and taking a role, with Steve O'Donnell, with on the competition side, Scott Miller, Jay Fabian. I think we have good leadership now, and I'll let the product on the track speak for itself. Yeah, I know, you know, in these 15 races that we've had, we've only had 6 different winners. But the competition is back where it used to be. The racing is back where it used to be. I know people want to see a photo finish every week, and you know what? I get it. I'm a huge football fan. I would love to know every football game I go to, you're going to see the winning field goal or the winning touchdown as the clock ticks to 0. That's not going to happen. I'm a huge Atlanta Braves baseball fan. I would love to think I'm going to see my Braves win every game with a 2-out, bottom of the ninth home run. It's not going to happen. And if we expect that with NASCAR, we're probably going to be disappointed. But I look at these first 15 races of 2019. I'll look at the direction they're looking across the horizon with possibly a new car in 2021, maybe to look at bringing more manufacturers into the sport. Our ratings this year, they essentially have been up almost every single week. I feel good about the direction we're headed. Are we ever going to get back to where we were a decade and a half ago? Probably not. No sport is. That's just where our society is today. But I know today, contrary to where I was maybe a decade ago, I'm pretty excited about the direction we're headed.
Well, it's definitely been an amazing season so far. So I have one final question for you, and it's a question that we like to ask everybody that we interview, especially those who have notoriety and that are well known. You're a NASCAR legend as a crew chief, Fox Sports analyst, and you're a mentor to so many, including those who watch you on TV every week. What do you want your ultimate legacy to say about you?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, one, I hope I'm doing what I'm doing for a long time to come. I feel very honored and very flattered to be a part of NASCAR for going on 40 years. 2020, good Lord's willing, I'm still around, will be my 40th year of NASCAR. And I guess that the one thing I always want to be noted for is I never forgot where I came from. I've always been humble, no matter how many races I won, no matter how much notoriety I've gained by being a part of NASCAR and Fox for 19 years, that I never forgot where I came from, and that I go back to my years as a crew chief. Even though I was a crew chief for 18 years, whether it was my car chief, my truck driver, a mechanic, a fabricator, I always treated myself and tried to look at myself as on the same level as they were. I would never ask anybody to do anything, go anywhere, be anywhere that I wouldn't do myself. And I always have worked hard at treating people like I wanted to be treated. I go back to my 5 or 6 years when I was just a crew member. In my final years as a crew chief, I always tried to treat people like I wanted to be treated. But the biggest thing is, even today, 18 years as a crew chief, 19 years as a broadcast analyst for Fox, that I've never forgotten where I came from, and that I still try to be a good, humble individual.
Well, Mr. McReynolds, it's been an honor and privilege to speak with you tonight. On a personal note, it's just been so awesome to speak with someone who I watched growing up in the 90s, watching you as a crew chief, and then, of course, throughout the 2000s as watching you on TV every week. It's truly been an honor and a privilege to speak with you. I thank you so much. I know it's been kind of a late-night interview here, but I thank you so much, and we look forward to watching you on TV at Sonoma in a couple weeks.
Now, it's hard to believe that Sonoma will be our last race. It's hard to believe it will be my partner, my teammate, my friend for 19 years, Darrell Waltrip. It will be his last race. You look at our group, for the most part, the same core group that's been together for 19 years. When we walked into that first race at Daytona Speed Weeks 2001, Mike Joy, myself, Darrell Waltrip, Matt Yoakum, we've all been there since the very beginning. And a huge part of our production truck, our producer Barry Landis, our director Artie Kempner, our pit producer Pam Miller, our senior producer Richie Zines, we have all been there together as teammates on the same broadcast team for going on now, completing out 19 years. We all have egos, but I think what has made us work for 19 years is the biggest part of our ego is let's just have a good broadcast. And we're going to miss DW immensely, but all we ask of him is to go in retirement and enjoy your life, enjoy your family, and be happy. And that's the well wishes we send him here in a little under 2 weeks.
That's right. We're definitely going to miss Daryl. Mr. McReynolds, once again, thank you so much. I truly appreciate your time this evening, and we look forward to seeing what's in store for your future and over the next several years.
Well, we appreciate you, and thank you for having me. I've really enjoyed it.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much.